There you go. All right, so we'll go ahead and talk about social development today. And of course, what we've already done is talk about, I forgot these had animation. We've already talked about the mental and spiritual aspects. If you haven't gotten to see those, they're online. The mental one is actually on my website. But then one thing I didn't like about the website, I liked the fact it was more private. It wasn't on my YouTube page. But I didn't like the fact I didn't have any way to see how many people were watching and that sort of thing. So I could really monitor it easier on my YouTube page. So anyway, go watch the spiritual one. I hear people telling me that they some people want to binge watch, some people look at them later in the week. I know a lot of parents are watching confirmation with their kids right now, so they may come back. I'm recording this session and see how that goes. The first 5 minutes is me looking at my camera, so I got to edit it or something. But today we're going to talk about the social, and there are several components I want to talk about in this lesson. So I want to talk about the 3 ready, set, goodbye commitments for your child's social development. I want to identify what are the aspects, what do we mean about social development, and kind of delve into what social development is and different aspects and attributes. And how are we going to prepare our child to function socially in an adult atmosphere? That's where we're going with Ready, Set, Goodbye. It's all about how are we getting them prepared for adulthood, and then discuss your child's adjustments to peers and peer groups. And then we'll have some time at the end for some Q&A. I hope this doesn't cut off at the 40-minute mark because I paid money yesterday, so it won't. So we'll see how it goes. I set up the meeting before, but I think if suddenly we just disappear at 10:40 or whatever, then you know why. Okay. For a while, if you want to mute your mics, that's okay. That might help the listening a little bit, and then you can turn them back on at 10:40. I'll just go ahead and blow through this, and then we'll do all the Q&A later. Okay, so let me move on to the social commitments. So these are what I try to present every time are 3 ideas for you of how you can commit to your child. Maybe you literally commit this to them, or maybe it's something you just discuss as parents and you behave like this in the way.
Focus on.
How long is this?
Hey, could y'all mute? I don't know who else is talking, but please mute if you haven't, because it comes through on the video. But then we'll all talk later. Turn it back on. Okay, so the first is addressing your child. We will teach you how to behave, how to cope with a variety of social settings. And the second part I'll talk about in a moment about the getting you out of social situations. We will help you grow communication skills essential to interactions with others, and we will put you in places where you can socialize with supportive people, including the church. So let me go through these. On the first one, we're talking about typical teen settings as well as settings that prepare them for adulthood. So we want to know, again, or want our teen to know that we are their partner in bringing them to adulthood. That's the whole philosophy of this. And your primary goal as a partner is to get them out of trouble if needed. Yeah, there may be some sort of discipline or something that happens later, but we'll worry about that later. Maybe there's even a 24-hour grace period before we even talk about that. But what we're going to talk about first is how to get you safe. Now, I talked about at the confirmation retreat having code words or safe words via voice or text to help them get out of things. It was interesting because Angela's on the call. I'm not going to ask her to share it right now, but she had a story of, her kids were a little resistant to that, and then sure enough, they wound up using it to get out of a situation. So one of them did. So it's something that you can do together. And then realize that your teen may still not contact you in this dangerous situation. They may still not trust that you're going to take care of things. So what you need to tell them is, look, I'll absolutely do this, but if for whatever reason you don't think that you want to call me, then have another adult that is a friend or a mentor that you feel comfortable with, or have a backup plan with a trusted team that absolutely can and will get you out of the situation. So if you were on a confirmation retreat, Roy Atwood had some positive and tragic stories of where teens turn in risky situations to get themselves out of a jam. So make sure, just prepare for that with them. Communication skills, I'll talk a lot more, and that's a lot of this lesson here. And then socializing with supportive people. So they're going to find plenty of their own places at school or other ventures to have socialization, but they may not encounter the supportive people that you want. And so you may want to put them in positive areas. That might be scouting, it might be church. You know, church is a great place to find such people. And you heard the youth talking about that, the older youth who were leaders on the confirmation family retreat. If you weren't there, you heard time after time these leaders getting up and saying, look, I didn't think anybody was going to care about me in this youth group, but the older kids really do take care of the younger kids. I'm a senior now. Come talk to me. Even if I don't know you, come find me. Don't worry about approaching me. Now, I'm not going to kid you. Church youth are not perfect. And sometimes they're not always as welcoming and inviting as you want them to be. But I will say, from my long experience in youth ministry, there is a friend there for everybody. There is a friend for every kind of person, every kind of group. And if they just keep coming, they will find that friend. Okay, let's talk about the definition of social development, the aspects of it, and it's how a person reacts to and interacts with other people, and it's highly affected by the environment that they're in. So the first thing is it contains the essential skill of communication, both sending and receiving, verbal and nonverbal communication. And it involves also how the person fits into a culture or does not fit in. That's a social thing. Social behavior is learned over time, and a person may adapt to different social settings. You can't prepare your child for every social setting. I have to laugh. I have a story. I don't know if I told this at the retreat or not, but my son Austin, when he was in maybe 8th or 9th grade, he was put into a social setting I hadn't really prepared him for. He went with a family, and they were at a very nice, fancy dinner. And he didn't know the whole rules, all the rules about how the silverware is supposed to go and all that. And he had 2 forks, and he didn't know what to do with the forks, and he was embarrassed to ask. So he came up with a very elegant solution. He dropped one. He dropped it on the floor, and then he was like, okay, well, I only have 1 fork that I have to use for everything. So I thought, okay, that's a great job getting through it, son. Now let's talk about how to adapt to that social setting next time. So there are different kinds of social settings like that to think about. And for teens, the social component is characterized by this growing importance of friendships, popularity, groups, cliques, the desire to find a partner, and a wider array of social settings than in childhood. So these are all things that we're thinking about when we talk about social development. Now, another way to break this down is that there's 2 factors in social development. There's expanding social roles and expanding social circles. So social roles is referring to advanced roles that the teen might play in society. Some of that is through work. It might be in teams. It might be leadership in organizations or a church. Also, a teen might suddenly be a confidant or a romantic partner. Those are new roles for them. Social circles may overlap with these social roles, such as with people they meet at church or work or teams in organizations. One thing I found that was a little bit random for me when my kids first started working, which I think was great that they were working, but all of a sudden they were encountering people from other schools, people who were out of school, that became kind of a work social circle. And that was something a little different, because now they're really mixed age groups and a lot of different statuses and so forth. And the main point is these social circles are going to be outside the family and outside of something that you have much control over. I think most of our attention as parents is on these social circles. This is what we tend to think about. But because we're preparing your child for adulthood, I want to start with the social roles and talk about those first. Okay, so in social roles, it's about preparing your child for that transition into adulthood And what you find here is it maps to the first two of those parental commitments that we just went through. So I asked some Facebook parents, friends of mine that are parents this week, for their ideas on social development, and there were a couple I really liked. One of them was be a present parent who fully engages your child and expects that same thing from them. So what this means is you're modeling adult behavior and treating them in an adult way or a soon-to-be adult way. You have eye contact. You're present with them. You're engaged when you're with them. And this is the kind of thing we do as adults ideally, and this is something they need to learn how to do too. And so you're always asking for that kind of thing back from them as well, is that we need you to engage this way. And I know there's times we're all on our phones or whatever and we get distracted, but look for opportunities to really get them to focus on being in such a social setting. One thing at our house was really big was dinner conversation. It wasn't always the status of what happened at school today. Sometimes we got into an interchange of ideas, and it might be some political topic. It might be a topic of what's going on at school, just more generally outside of the classroom, or something we see going on in society. I think these kinds of things, and even though we had a mixed age group of about 7 years span between ours, it's really good, even for the younger ones, to hear this kind of conversation and start taking all that in, and to get into these deeper kind of mini adult kind of conversations about them. A second idea I really liked was don't allow shyness to be an excuse to be rude to people. And this was actually a problem we had with our youngest, with our daughter. It wasn't that she was trying to be rude. It's just that she's adopted and she has this kind of inherent distrust of a lot of people. And so what would come across to others is that she was kind of cold or icy. Even in her peer group, she kind of came across this way, even with people of her own age that she would meet. So it wasn't just with older people. And what really helped her, I think, and it helped all my children, was having work in a customer-facing environment. So when she did that, she had to interact with people in a different way. And I would worry about things, and she's like, Dad, I understand how to talk to an adult whose daughter is the gymnast in the class I'm teaching. I understand how to do that. And she learned a lot from it, how to interact with people, communicate with adults. With my son working at Cinemark, he learned how to hate people. he really didn't like, they're like, what are the sizes of the popcorn? He's like, right next to my face, it shows small, medium, and large cups. That's what, so he got fed up with people quite a bit. But you learn about, different perspectives, right? You learn it from a customer perspective, business perspective. So I'd really encourage you to have your children find jobs, not only just for money and responsibility, but really that social development actually develops quite a bit in the work world. You can get similar benefits out of school project teams, sports teams, student organizations, other environments. And all these complex interactions build their social skills. Now, your teen may run into environments where they don't know how to handle a situation. And this is where role-playing and rehearsing strategies can be helpful. So again, with our daughter, Rebecca, she had never been a leader in anything, but she became president of her dance club at school. And there was a lot of conflict among the leaders, especially the girls in the group. So we played through different scenarios about how to handle the conflict. She really didn't know what to do about these things. How do you handle the conflict between the leaders? We would role play. We would talk about ways to phrase things. She would try something out. We would change it or suggest things. What if scenarios? The ramifications of each of the what if scenarios. And this helped her process her responses. Eventually, she decided that she should not continue as president of the club and she should step down. And when she did, we also talked about how to approach that. What's the best way socially to do this? How can you make a smooth transition? What are things going to be like when you're not the president anymore? So these are all good discussions to have, and it can help them. And I think this is where other adults are valuable. As a youth counselor, I can tell you that I could say the same thing to your child that you were saying to them, and it carries different weight because I wasn't the parent. And so it's so important to find other people. For my kids, for my oldest, he had a couple of Sunday school teachers that were very influential for him. My son, the middle child, he had a lot of people at church that he really tied into and were very influential with him, including a businessman and his wife who got involved in his life. So those are things where it helps them also learn the importance of networking, building personal relationships. For example, when my son was looking for a job, I said, go talk to the businessman and network with him. He doesn't, when he's like, well, he's in a different field. I said, that doesn't matter. You want to network with him, get to know his network, have him help you, and then you can help him, or you can pay it forward or whatever. So these are all things that you learn. Earlier, I mentioned the social role of a romantic partner, and I debated where to plug romance into this model because it's social, it's emotional, which is next week, it's physical, which is the last week. I've decided to put it in with the physical, and because I think when you have some of those physical discussions, you might want to talk about the whole picture. So that's where I'm going to address the romantic part. Okay, so let's move on. The social circles. There we go. So this is what we usually think of with social life and social development. And as you see, it maps to the first and third of those parental commitments. So when there's some significant changes with social circles, when your child is a child in childhood, the popular people, I'm sorry, that's in a moment. I'm jumping ahead. What they have is shared activities usually. It's a shared activity and it's usually single gender. When they get to be teens, it becomes mixed gender. And it's not the activities that are shared so much. It becomes thoughts and feelings. Intimate thoughts and feelings start to be shared among teenagers. So your adolescent now is starting to become aware of more social cues. They're getting there, but they're still learning about body language, subtleties of discussion, how people put things. So they're becoming more aware of how others feel. This is one reason that you see in our youth group when there's a grief situation, like we had that accident outside the church a couple of years ago, when we've had other grief situations, it's why it has such a ripple impact throughout the group, because they are starting to be aware of how others feel. So when their friend is going through something, then they're going through it too. Or even if it's a friend of a friend who's going through something, they want to support their friend who's supporting that friend. It has this ripple effect. So that's why when there's a grief situation, they all get impacted so much. An adult knows that these things pass. They understand what the grief process is. You've been through it time and again. But for a teen, it's brand new. It's raw, and it has a big impact on them. So, and it may not be a grief situation. It could be anything. It's, the breaking up with the boyfriend kind of thing that has a ripple impact because they're starting to heighten their feelings, their sensitivity of other people's feelings, and they start to embrace those more. Of course, friends and peer group become very important to your teenager. They will identify at some point with their friends as being more important than family, which really hurts, but they come back around. I'll promise you that there becomes a balance over time. I really think that absence you see in the later years of high school is beneficial to the parents because they start to separate a little bit out. It prepares you for when they leave the nest, actually. If they're driving and they're not home as much, it really lessens the impact later on than this flash cut if they just leave. So they become in peer groups, and they have both what's called homophily and influence in those groups. So homophily is just another fancy way of saying birds of a feather flock together. They start to find people like them and socialize with them. And then influence is how the people in the group start to shape each other. And that can be, it can be positive or negative through modeling, through peer pressure. I mean, there's such a thing as positive peer pressure. So ideally, they have a positive group, and it's shown that teams with positive peer relationships are much better off than those with conflicted peer relationships or social isolation. So you want to encourage them into positive peer groups and friends, not just only to keep them away from negative influences, but to build them up with the positive ones. Remember that your teen can be the influencer for someone else. They can be a light for someone else. This is something we talked about a lot with our kids, the Christian perspective. Jesus told his followers, you are the light of the world, and you're held to a higher standard. You realize the influence that you have on others. I would tell them, you influence them, don't let them negatively influence you. I mean, positively influence you is good, but don't let them negatively influence you. You influence them. I thought of when I prepared this, I thought of this girl in high school named Debbie. Now, this is kind of weird. I grew up in a small town, and we had a place, dance hall, that they actually let the teenagers into. You could be 14 and get into the dance hall. It was called Kicker Palace, and you had to have something stapled onto your collar in order to buy a drink. But otherwise, you could go and you could dance and so forth. So we would always hang out at Kicker Palace on the weekends. Well, there was this one girl who had a wild hair named Debbie. And some nights, Debbie would come and hang with us. Because even in Kicker Palace, I mean, if somebody leaves a beer on the table, guess what the kids are doing, right? You drink the last third of a beer or something. So, so that was going on. But anyway, Debbie would get involved with these other kids, and maybe they'd run out and do something later. Debbie would come hang out with my sister and me. And she said, when I'm with you two, I don't feel like being bad. I just feel like having fun, And so this is where your child can be a positive influence, even if somebody out there, Debbie, did my parents want me hanging around with Debbie? Maybe not. But Debbie benefited from us putting that positive influence on her. Influence can also be subconscious. There's some research on Instagram with images that when teens see images of things that are what we as adults would consider positive, that parts of their brains activate and they have good feelings about that. And when they see things that we adults would consider negative, they also get images or hit the parts of their brain triggered that say, yes, this is a bad thing. So all that's good, right? But they get a conflict when they see one of those negative images, but then it has a lot of likes, or that thing is celebrated. They get this mixed message that starts changing their values. And so this is where, social media can do that. But let's face it, we all went through all that before. People would celebrate things that were not proper, and they're not so bad, and they're holding you back from doing the things that are fun, and all these things we started hearing ourselves. It's just maybe accelerated or even more subtle with social media, but that's always been there. So it's this idea of the negative being positive, that they start to have this conflict when their values can start to change. So it's hard for us as parents to control those influences. In fact, it's not feasible for us to always be there with them or correct things. So this is why the session, if you didn't see it yet, on mental development and decision making is so important. It really addresses those kinds of things. It's vital to stay vigilant, ask questions, get a sense of where your teen is being positively and negatively influenced. You want to open up your home as much as possible so that the kids come there. Because believe me, your kids are going to get in a situation you don't know what those parents' values are. And it can even be somebody that you go to church with, and they're not putting out the values or the environment that you want. So as often as possible, I would have the kids come to your house and enjoy a few years of making pizza and just having kids there, and then talk to your teen. So I know you probably hear that and you go, okay, talk to the teen, right? The last thing they want to do is talk to me. Next week on the emotional part, I'm going to give you the magic potion, the secret trick, the proven formula for how to get your teen to talk to you. I've shared this in my classes before. It's something I learned when my kids were first getting into high school. A parent who was ahead of me in life shared this with me, and it was great. And I used it to great effect. I've shared it with parents. I've had parents come back and go, I cannot get my teen to stop talking when I do this thing. So hopefully that's a tease for you to go watch next week's on emotional development. You'll learn that trick. Okay, and then the last slide I have is on popularity. And there's a difference between childhood popularity and teen popularity. In childhood, the kids who are popular are actually the ones who make others feel good, make them feel included, make them feel valued. But adolescent popularity is based on status, the standards of who's the most cool, however that's defined at the time, whoever is the most up to speed on trends. Um, Starting in middle school, these adolescent brains are intrigued by what or who is getting the most attention, who has the most power or influence, who has the most desirable attributes. That kind of starts to get triggered. And so there's this gravitational pull towards whatever status might mean, and that becomes what's popular. What's ironic is that popularity really doesn't have to do with being likable. In fact, the popular kids often aren't well liked by others. In fact, you could argue that the term popular is not the right term. It's really the kids with status. And interestingly enough, research shows that teens who were popular like that, but not well liked, can really struggle in adulthood. They struggle more than expected with loneliness, with addiction, with marriage, with holding a job, all these other issues. So the messages for your teen out of that are, if you're popular, make sure to do the things that become likable. Not because you're trying to be well liked necessarily. That's not the point. This is where a Christian perspective comes in. It has to do with treating other people properly, treating other people as do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That use your popularity, if that's where you are, for good. When my kids were little and they were fascinated, like at age 5, 6, they're fascinated with superheroes. And it'd be like, today I'm, this Space Ranger or whatever they were that day. I'm Superman, whatever, Batman. And I would always ask them, are you using your powers for evil or for good? And they would go, oh, I'm using my powers for good. And I said, well, it's possible to use your powers for evil. And you have to watch out for that if you're a superhero. So you have to use your powers for good. And like, okay, well, the superpower of popularity needs to be used for good. And this is what we need to convince our children of. And then if you're not popular, if your child isn't popular, find your niche, find your own peer groups. Simply enjoy that. Don't be socially distant from others. There's a group out there for you. Don't have a negative self-image because you're not popular. In fact, I would not use the word popular. I would change the word popular to status. You don't have the status that they have. Popular sounds very positive. It's popular. But status is maybe a little more neutral, I think. It's their status that they have a lot of people who know them very well. It's their status that they run with that particular crowd or they follow those particular trends. That doesn't mean they're popular, right? Those kinds of things. I would disarm the word popular and try to repurpose it into status. I don't know how many of you have watched the movie 8th Grade. Have you ever seen that one? It's sometimes a little painful movie to watch. I watched it and I really thought it was a great movie because it really gets down into what it's like to be on the cusp of going into high school and the confliction you have and trying to understand there's things of how to fit into your own peer group. The girl who it follows is painfully shy and has to get over all kinds of things. And how does she even start working up and interacting with teens who are older than her? I think it's a really excellent movie to get some compassion and insight into what it's like to be a child today trying to turn into an adult. So that's one I would recommend if you're binge watching something. Find it on Netflix or somewhere else and watch 8th Grade. It's a touching movie to me. It's got funny moments. It's got sad moments. You laugh, you cry, you kiss $5 goodbye, whatever. So, okay, so that's all I wanted to share. What I want to do is I'm going to stop. Wait, I want to stop the sharing part. I will send those slides out so that you have them. And I want to go back into the view where I can kind of see everybody here. And open it up if you want to turn on your mics again. I just want to open it up for questions and so forth for about 15 minutes. Hopefully in 7 seconds, they're not going to cut us off and we'll be able to keep going because I paid my upgrade money. So anyway, I see a few other people join, Jared and Eric. And Sean and Cindy, thanks for joining after we got going there. So welcome, and hope everything's going well with you. And if you want to turn on your video, you can do that, but it is optional, but certainly the audio. Does anybody have any questions or comments, either based on what we talked about, what we should have talked about and didn't address, or about any other thing going on with your teen? And I can give my insight, but we can maybe talk about those things together.
I have a question.
Okay.
So, how do you steer your child towards not being so concerned with status or popularity?
I think it's something that they're always going to struggle with. It's not as simple as saying, well, don't be worried about that. Like in that movie, 8th Grade, they spend a lot of time like, the dad's like, oh, you're great. Don't worry about all that. You're just great as you are. And it just bounces right off of her, right? It's not really what she wants to hear. I think sometimes it helps. There's times it's helpful to share your stories of growing up, and there's times it's not helpful. I had somebody who was a drug counselor say, I would never tell my child anything I did with alcohol or drugs. You're just giving them permission if you do that. But I think if you talk about, here's what I observed, and I think fundamentally, even though you have social media, you have a lot of other things going on, I think fundamentally a 16-year-old is a 16-year-old, that a lot of things are very similar. And you could, talk about things that you saw go wrong with status or were beneficial, people who were positive, status symbols, if you would, ones who are negative. But I think one of the things beyond that is just what really helped my kids was trying to learn who they are. My oldest didn't feel like he fit in anywhere. He felt really the odd fish to everything. And where he started to come around was he realized that he was better as the kid in the back of the room. He was the one who connected to the outsiders. He was the one who started to build this coalition of people who were not cool. One thing he did that was really interesting was he became involved with a group when he got to Plano Senior High that was, I think it was called Gay Straight Alliance. And he reached out to people who were gay within this Gay Straight Alliance, and people who were ostracized, who were marginal, who were on the outside. So I think one thing is we kind of encouraged him, find those people. And when he found different friends, we would try to understand, well, what makes them your friend? Well, he's kind of like me. He's kind of on the outside. All right. Now you've got an inside, right? So I think those are some of my thoughts. Anything else that people have that they've seen or experienced?
I think along those same lines is I just feel like just because our two boys are so different in their personalities and stuff, but no matter if you're the outgoing kind of always talkative one or you're more quiet in the background, is just to talk to them. What we try to do is just about being comfortable in your own skin and just realizing you don't have to try to be like somebody else, or you know what I mean. It's easier said than done, but that's more of the mentality that I'm hoping that they have, is just to be confident and just to be comfortable in your own skin, whatever that looks like for you.
There's a girl I think about at church. I know y'all know Rachel Cortram, who's the children's leader and everything. Boy, one of the most adjusted kids I've ever seen is her oldest daughter. She came through, and from 6th grade, she's just like this kind of different kid, and she just embraced it. And the fact she was confident with it, there was something. At first, the other kids are a little like, "What's this?" And then it was almost magnetic how other kids would be drawn to her, even though she was an odd fish, and she was like this old soul to begin with. Just a maturity level in 6th grade that most 6th graders don't have, and that made her kind of weird. But something over time, just the fact she was so authentic started drawing other people to her. So that's not something they're going to be able to see going into it, but it's something that might occur and see those positive benefits, I think. What other questions do you have? Or comments? I don't know. Comments, questions? Anything that struck you out of this lesson that was something new to think about?
I think the social, the social circles and the social awareness are, those are important things to help, just for us as parents to try to keep our heads around as we see our kids in different social situations. So I appreciate that perspective.
Thanks.
I think the fitting in one was a good point because I mean, I've always just thought, kids are going to find a place where they fit and you may or may not like it. So we can't control everything that our kids do or who they're hanging out with. But I mean, we can try. But just the influence that we can have on that, hanging around older kids. I mean, like that one is something that really just puts me on high alert. I just, just trying to steer them in the direction. I mean, we can't make them. They're going to do what they're going to do. I mean, they're at school all day, but I just think, they're going to find somewhere to fit in. So I think trying to help navigate that with them as much as they'll let us is important.
Jamie, you brought up something I may be talking about it in another lesson as well, but the hanging with older kids. When my oldest son was a freshman, he developed a friendship with a kid I think was a junior. Went to a different school because in Plano they're kind of fragmented freshman, sophomore, and the junior, senior. And when he first started hanging around with this guy, I really liked it because the junior had some more maturity. And I saw my kid not being very mature, and he was learning some positive things from it. Over time, I started seeing the junior trying to draw him into some negative things. And that's when I wanted to step in and say, you know what, this is not a positive relationship. And I really want to limit your time with this guy. And so then I think over time, my son, he always was the type who plunges in and learns things the hard way. Over time, he started to see this also, and he cut off the friendship. But one principle that we've seen in the schools, it's not universal, but it's a general rule of thumb. Whichever schools have the seniors have the most problems. So if your child is in a four-year school with seniors, they're going to have more interaction as a freshman with those seniors. And it's something to be watchful of. If the seniors are very positive, man, they can do a lot of great things. But a lot of the seniors bring in problems because they're right on the cusp of adulthood. They are straining at the bit. They want to take riskier behavior. They're like, I'm a senior. I'm going to get this done and be done with it. And I'm out of here in a year. I don't care anymore. So you see it mainly in those junior, senior schools is where those things happen. But when it's 4 years, it can trickle down to the freshmen and sophomores. So depending on which school your kid is in, and this is something you'll learn also whenever we have the teen panel. Don't think because your kid is in a private school that it's a completely different environment. It is not. The parents may have put them in there because they have a religious philosophy. It doesn't mean the kid does. I remember one time when I had a kid say, I think I'm the only Christian at my school. And this kid went to one of the big name Christian schools here. Now, I'm not trying to criticize those schools and what they try to achieve. That's not my point. My point is kids are kids, and it doesn't matter which school they're in, they're going to behave that way. Hopefully it's a little better if they're in certain environments that focus on spirituality more than you get in public schools. And they do, but still, it doesn't mean there's an immune, safe place.
Yeah. I think it's one thing to have like a mentor, like let's say you're a freshman and you have a senior that's kind of a mentor relationship.
Yes.
I was more speaking about like the social, like going out, like cruising around in a car, things like that. That's more where I was going with the.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you'll get those interactions with freshman, senior. I mean, I was in a 4-year school in a small town. You knew everybody in every grade, right? And I was on the football team with guys, and I was, as a freshman, driving around with seniors, and they're handing cigarettes my direction. I mean, in the car, which luckily I was immune to that particular temptation. But anyway, you get put in those situations. I agree.
Yeah, I think for us, we're nervous about. So we've got our 8th grader that's headed into high school next year, and it'll be 4 years. And just her, she is an oddball, and so now she's going to be looking for different people to hang out with, and just by definition, they're going to be an older group of people because unless a lot changes over the summer. She's got a small friend group, but they're probably going to be looking to expand. So, we've already had some conversations about it, but traversing that makes both my husband and I like just a little bit nervous, a little bit trepidatious, but because I think when you've got those kids that are oddballs, they are more desperate to find that place to fit in. So there's just, I think they have a more exploratory nature about them. So it's just that part of it makes us nervous, but we'll see. I don't know, I mean, it's going to come faster than we think, especially with the kids being, distance learning now. So I mean, maybe there's a potential they're going to go back, but at this point it's not looking really great. So.
Yeah, I think school's out for the year myself, but I want to, and I think it's to your child's detriment. In this case, I talked about this some on retreat, but don't underestimate the tremendous sea change that happens between 8th and 9th grade. I see 2 places from working with youth. 6th to 7th grade is a big leap academically. It's like in middle school, they take it easy on them in 6th, and then 7th, the hammer comes down. And then the other is 8th to 9th, and it's both academically and socially. They're usually thrown into a bigger environment, like a bigger region of kids. Those friend groups that they had may start to dissipate because they're never in the same class anymore, right? They may never even see each other at school, so it's harder for them to stay together. And all of a sudden, they have everything in their world is thrown off. This is where actually confirmation class has been so beneficial. I think there was some wisdom in putting it spanning 8th grade and 9th grade. You wouldn't believe the number of kids who lean on their confirmation class in the fall that really didn't know they were going to need the confirmation class. And suddenly they're falling back to something that is normal. And this is why I think it's unfortunate your kids through April and May, March, April, May, they're not going to have that association, and maybe longer, with the other kids directly in the confirmation class. They're not going to have quite as strong of an anchor. So if during the summer things get back to normal, I'd really encourage them to get into the confirmation process again, and to really, how can you do things to foster them getting together with other kids? Maybe it's a time when you actually have a good excuse for, we've been isolated so long. Let's start doing those more social things, even social things we wouldn't normally do. Let's bring some of these kids, like let's bring your confirmation group over, or something like that, because that'll be a group that they really need to lean on. I'm really glad we have a few people on today who are normally in confirmation as table leaders, so that's great. I'm hoping that more than the small group leaders can watch the videos and things like that. That's one of the there's always a positive benefit to things, and that's one here is that they have more of an opportunity to see and hear the lessons that they normally don't. Well, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up as 11 o'clock service is coming. Are there any joys or concerns that we can be praying about? Okay, well, let me pray us out. Heavenly Father, we're so grateful for the opportunity through technology to be able to communicate with each other and to see each other and to worship and to study and to pray together. We pray for our world. We pray for our leaders, for them to make wise decisions, for our medical personnel to be safe and effective. We pray for those who are afflicted, both medically and economically, by this virus. And we pray for our own ability to reach out and be a light in the world at this time as Christians. Bless these confirmation families as they go through this time, through the rest of the school year, that they may stay strong and healthy, and that they will form new relationships within the family and prepare for the social development of their children as they head towards adulthood. We lift all these things in your holy name. Amen. Okay, next week I'm going to go back to just recorded videos. I sent out the schedule if you saw that on Realm. But did you like doing this? Maybe we'll do a little bit more of this from time to time.
Yes.
Is this
I
a
like
good?
the Zoom.
You like it? Is this a good time to do it?
Yes.
So,
Good for us.
okay. Well, I may do more. Maybe we'll do this next week as well, and see if we can get some more people, and yet still have the recording. I'll have to see how the recording comes out, because I do want to catch the people who are doing other things this time. Okay, well, I'm going to scurry off to church, and y'all take care. Have a good week.
All right.